I never expected that a simple firewood delivery would turn into a legal nightmare that would consume the next 6 months of my life. The letter from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association landed in my mailbox on a crisp October morning, and when I opened it, my coffee suddenly tasted bitter. My name is William Irving, and I had been living on my 5-acre property in rural Vermont for nearly 15 years before the Meadowbrook Hills development even broke ground. My land was part of an old farming community outside Burlington, and I had always relied on the commercial delivery easement that ran along the eastern edge of my property. That easement had been there since 1947, created when the original farmer who owned this land needed a way for logging trucks and equipment to access the back 40 acres. When I bought the property in 2008, that easement came with it, recorded clearly in the county records. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendricks, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. It informed me that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized commercial traffic through the neighborhood. Apparently, my firewood supplier's truck had been spotted using the access road that ran through their development, and they claimed this violated their community standards. I read the letter 3 times, my jaw clenching tighter with each pass. The access road they were talking about was the exact same road that my easement granted me the right to use. It had been there decades before their cookie-cutter subdivision existed. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, Tom Brennan, who had also owned his property long before the development arrived. "Tom, did you get one of these ridiculous letters from the HOA?" I asked when he picked up. "What letter? I don't deal with those people. My property isn't in their jurisdiction, thank God. Neither is mine, but they seem to think they can fine me for using my own easement." Tom let out a low whistle. "That's that Patricia woman, isn't it? She tried to tell me last month that my fence didn't meet their aesthetic standards." I told her where she could stick her standards. I couldn't help but laugh, though my frustration was building. "I need to dig out my property papers. This is insane." After hanging up, I spent the next hour in my home office, pulling out the filing cabinet where I kept all my important documents. The deed was there, along with the survey maps and the easement agreement. It was all crystal clear. The commercial delivery easement, recorded as easement number 1947-0342 in the Chittenden County records, granted perpetual access for commercial vehicles to service my property via the road that had been designated as Old Mill Road. The fact that Meadowbrook Hills had later built their development around that road didn't change my rights. I scanned the documents and sent them to my lawyer, Richard Morrison, along with a copy of the HOA's threatening letter. Richard and I had gone to college together, and he had handled my property purchase back in 2008. If anyone knew the ins and outs of easement law, it was him. He called me back within 2 hours. "William, this is absurd. Your easement predates their development by over 60 years. They have zero legal standing to fine you. So what do I do? Just ignore it." "Not exactly. You need to respond formally, establishing your legal position. If you ignore it, they might try to escalate, and while they will lose, it is better to nip this in the bud. I will draft a letter for you." Richard's letter was beautiful in its precision. It explained the easement history, cited the specific county records, referenced Vermont property law, and firmly stated that the HOA had no authority over my property or my use of the legally established easement. He sent it via certified mail to both Patricia Hendricks and the HOA's management company. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I came home to find a bright orange sticker plastered across my mailbox. It read, "Violation Notice," in bold letters, and claimed that my property was in continued non-compliance with community standards. Below that, it stated that additional fines of $100 per day would be assessed until the violation was corrected. My hands shook as I peeled the sticker off. I had never even attended an HOA meeting, never signed any agreement with them, never been part of their organization in any way. My property sat on the edge of their development, separated by a good 200 feet of woods. The only connection was that the access road, which I had legal right to use, ran through their neighborhood. I called Richard immediately. They just escalated. They are trying to fine me $100 a day now. Do not pay them a single cent, Richard said firmly. This is harassment. I am going to file a motion for declaratory judgment. We will force this into court and get a judge to rule on the easement once and for all. How long will that take? Couple of months, probably. But in the meantime, keep documenting everything they do. Every letter, every sticker, every interaction. This is going to look very bad for them. That weekend, I had a scheduled firewood delivery. I ordered 10 cords every fall from a local supplier, Jason Whitmore, who ran a small operation about 20 miles away. He had been delivering to my property for years, always using the easement road because it was the only practical access to my woodshed. Jason's truck rumbled up the road on Saturday morning, and I met him at the delivery point. He backed up to my woodshed and we started unloading. We were about halfway through when a white Mercedes SUV pulled up, and a woman I had never seen before stepped out. She was probably in her late 40s, with blonde hair cut in a sharp bob and wearing what looked like expensive athletic wear despite clearly not being dressed for any actual athletics. "Excuse me, this is private property," she announced, her voice sharp and nasal. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "This is my property and this is a legal delivery. I am Patricia Hendricks, HOA president. That truck cannot be here. It is violating our community standards." Jason shot me a confused look. I shook my head slightly and turned back to Patricia. "Miss Hendricks, my lawyer has already explained this to you. I have a commercial delivery easement that predates your development by decades. This road is part of that easement. I don't care about your supposed easement. This neighborhood has rules, and commercial vehicles are not permitted except for community-approved services. My property is not part of your neighborhood," I said, keeping my voice level despite my rising anger. "I never signed any HOA agreement. I bought this land years before your development existed." Patricia's face reddened. "The road is part of our community infrastructure. We maintain it, we pay for it, and we control who uses it." "No, actually, the easement means you don't control who uses it for legally permitted purposes. And firewood delivery is one of those purposes. We will see what the court says about that," she snapped. "Yes, we will," I replied. "My lawyer is already filing the paperwork." She stood there for another moment, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say more but couldn't figure out what. Finally, she spun on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes, peeling out with more speed than was necessary for a residential road. Jason let out a low whistle. "That is one angry lady. You have no idea. Let us finish this delivery before she comes back with reinforcements." We got the rest of the wood stacked and Jason headed out. I expected more trouble and I was not disappointed. On Monday, I received another letter, this time claiming that my continued defiance of community standards was creating a hostile environment, and that the HOA was exploring all legal options to address my willful violations. Richard filed the declaratory judgment motion in Chittenden County Superior Court the following week. The motion asked the court to rule on whether the HOA had any authority to restrict my use of the easement, or to fine me for exercising my legal rights. He also included a request for an injunction to prevent the HOA from continuing their harassment. The HOA responded with their own attorney, a guy named Marcus Fletcher from a firm in Burlington that apparently specialized in real estate law. Fletcher's response was heavy on indignation and light on actual legal reasoning. He argued that the easement had been abandoned through non-use, which was laughable since I used it regularly for various deliveries. He also claimed that the development of the neighborhood had somehow invalidated the easement, which showed either a fundamental misunderstanding of easement law or a willingness to make arguments he knew were false. The court scheduled a hearing for early December. In the meantime, the harassment continued. Patricia seemed to have made it her personal mission to catch my delivery drivers in some kind of violation. When my propane company came to fill my tank, she was there taking pictures. When a furniture delivery arrived, she blocked the truck and tried to prevent them from proceeding. I started warning all my delivery services about the situation, and most of them were understanding, though a few seemed nervous about getting involved in a legal dispute. My propane company had been servicing properties in the area for 40 years and told Patricia to pound sand when she tried to intimidate their driver. The furniture company was less confident and almost turned around, but I managed to convince them that they were legally in the clear. Tom stopped by one afternoon in mid-November while all this was going on. He brought a 6-pack of beer and we sat on my porch, watching the autumn leaves drift down from the maples. "So she is really going all in on this, huh?" Tom said, taking a sip of his beer. "It is insane. I have never seen someone so determined to be wrong. It is a control thing. These HOA types, they get a little bit of power and it goes straight to their heads. She probably runs that whole neighborhood like her personal fiefdom." "Well, she is about to learn that her fiefdom ends at her property lines." Tom nodded. "You know, I heard from the guys at the hardware store that she has been trying to expand the HOA boundaries, wants to bring more properties under their control, increase the fees, all that." That got my attention. "Seriously?" "Yeah. There are about 6 properties on the edges of the development that aren't part of the HOA, including yours and the Peterson place on the other side. Word is she has been trying to get the county to let them annex those properties into the HOA jurisdiction. That is not how it works. You can't just force people into an HOA." "I know that. You know that, but apparently Patricia thinks if she wants something bad enough, the universe has to give it to her." The hearing arrived on a cold December morning. I met Richard at the courthouse at 8:30, both of us dressed in suits and carrying briefcases full of documentation. The hearing was scheduled before Judge Margaret Whitmore, who had a reputation for being no-nonsense and intolerant of frivolous legal arguments. Patricia arrived with Marcus Fletcher and 2 other HOA board members, a thin man named Donald Pritchard, and a heavyset woman named Susan Reynolds. They huddled in the hallway outside the courtroom, speaking in low voices and shooting hostile looks in my direction. The courtroom was small, one of the standard civil hearing rooms in the courthouse. Judge Whitmore entered promptly at 9, and we all rose. She was a tall woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "This is case number 2020 for CV 1847, Irving versus Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. Counsel, please state your appearances." Richard stood. "Richard Morrison for the plaintiff, Your Honor." Fletcher stood as well. "Marcus Fletcher for the defendant, HOA, Your Honor." "Mr. Morrison, this is your motion. Please proceed." Richard launched into a clear, concise presentation of the facts. He showed the court copies of the original easement from 1947, the survey maps from my property purchase, and the county records showing the continuous existence of the easement. He explained that the easement explicitly permitted commercial vehicle traffic for deliveries to the serviced property, and that this right could not be extinguished by subsequent development. Judge Whitmore listened carefully, occasionally making notes. When Richard finished, she turned to Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher, I have read your response. I will be frank with you. I am struggling to find any legal basis for your position. The easement clearly predates your client's development and is properly recorded. What am I missing?" Fletcher stood, and I could see him trying to project confidence. "Your Honor, the HOA's position is that the nature of the easement has changed. When it was created in 1947, this was rural farmland. Now it is a residential neighborhood with families and children. The level of commercial traffic that Mr. Irving is generating creates safety concerns and is incompatible with residential use." "How many commercial deliveries does Mr. Irving receive?" the judge asked. Richard stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Irving receives approximately 1 firewood delivery per year, 1 propane delivery per quarter, and occasional other deliveries such as furniture or appliances. We are talking about perhaps a dozen commercial vehicle trips per year." Judge Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "A dozen trips per year. And this is the commercial traffic you find objectionable, Mr. Fletcher. Your Honor, the issue is not just the frequency but the precedent. If we allow this, we cannot control other commercial uses of the road." "You do not control this road," the judge said sharply. "That is the point of an easement. Mr. Irving has a legal right to use this access, and your client's development around that access does not extinguish his rights. Do you have any case law to support your position that residential development can invalidate a properly recorded commercial easement?" Fletcher shuffled his papers. "Your Honor, we believe that the doctrine of changed circumstances applies. The Vermont Supreme Court has recognized that easements can be modified or terminated when the surrounding conditions change so dramatically that the original purpose no longer makes sense. That doctrine typically applies when the dominant estate itself changes in such a way that the easement is no longer necessary," Judge Whitmore replied. "Has Mr. Irving's property changed in such a way?" "Well, no, but the Servian estate has changed." "The Servian estate does not get to unilaterally terminate an easement just because they developed around it. If that were the law, easements would be meaningless. You could simply build around someone's legal rights and claim they no longer apply." I felt a surge of relief. The judge clearly saw through their arguments. Fletcher tried a few more angles, arguing about traffic safety and community standards, but Judge Whitmore cut him off. "Mr. Fletcher, I have heard enough. This easement is valid, properly recorded, and gives Mr. Irving clear rights to commercial vehicle access. Your client has no authority to fine him, restrict his use of the easement, or harass his delivery drivers. I am granting the motion for declaratory judgment and issuing an injunction prohibiting the HOA from interfering with Mr. Irving's easement rights." She looked at Patricia, who was sitting ramrod straight in her chair, her face pale. "Miss Hendricks, I want to be very clear. If you continue this behavior, Mr. Irving will have grounds for a harassment suit, and you may find yourself personally liable for damages. The HOA's actions here border on bad faith, and I will not hesitate to award attorney fees if this continues. Do you understand?" Patricia nodded stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Mr. Morrison, please prepare the order. We are adjourned." Richard and I walked out of the courthouse into the weak December sunshine. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That went about as well as it could have, Richard said, shaking my hand. The judge was not impressed with their arguments. What happens now? I will draft the official order, the judge will sign it, and it will be entered into the record. The HOA will be legally prohibited from interfering with your easement. If they violate the injunction, they will be in contempt of court. Do you think they will actually stop? Richard's expression turned thoughtful. Most people back down when a judge tells them they are wrong. But Patricia Hendricks strikes me as someone who has trouble accepting she does not get her way. Document everything, just in case. He was right to be cautious. For about 2 weeks, things were quiet. Then in early January, I noticed something odd. The section of Old Mill Road that ran through the Meadowbrook Hills development had always been paved and well maintained. But when I drove down it to check my mailbox one afternoon, I noticed that barriers had been placed across the road at the point where it entered the development. The barriers were those orange and white striped wooden things, the kind used for construction zones. A sign attached to them read, "Road closed for repairs." I got out of my truck and walked up to the barriers. There was no evidence of any actual road work. No equipment, no workers, no damaged pavement. Just barriers blocking the road. I took pictures with my phone and called Richard. "They are trying to do an end run around the injunction," he said after I explained the situation. "If they can claim the road is closed for repairs, they can prevent you from using it without technically violating the judge's order. But there are no repairs happening. It is completely fake." "I know. Do you have another way to access your property?" "I can use the back way, but it adds 20 minutes and the road is much rougher. Plus, that is not the point. The easement specifically grants access via Old Mill Road." "Agreed. I am going to file a motion to show cause. We will haul them back into court and make them explain this to Judge Whitmore. Something tells me she is not going to be happy." The motion to show cause was filed the next day, and the court scheduled a hearing for late January. In the meantime, the barriers stayed up. I had a propane delivery scheduled, and I had to direct the truck to use the back access road, which the driver was not happy about. The road was narrow and winding, and it took him an extra 40 minutes to make the delivery. But the barriers created problems for the HOA as well. Several homeowners in the development used Old Mill Road as their primary access route, and they were not pleased about the detour. I started hearing through Tom that there was growing dissent within the HOA about Patricia's leadership. The January hearing was even shorter than the first one. Richard presented the evidence of the fake road closure, including dated photographs showing the complete absence of any road work. Fletcher tried to argue that routine maintenance was planned, but Judge Whitmore was having none of it. "Mr. Fletcher, there are no workers, no equipment, and no actual repairs being performed. This is a transparent attempt to circumvent my injunction. Your client is in contempt of court." Fletcher's face went pale. "Your Honor, I am sure there has been a miscommunication. The HOA board will remove the barriers immediately. The barriers should never have been placed. Miss Hendricks, you are fined $1,000, payable to the court within 30 days. If there are any further attempts to interfere with Mr. Irving's easement rights, I will consider more severe sanctions, including potential jail time for contempt." Am I making myself clear? Patricia's face was bright red, but she managed to nod. "Yes, Your Honor. The barriers will be removed by close of business today. If they are not, I will send the sheriff to remove them and arrest whoever placed them. This hearing is adjourned." The barriers were gone by that afternoon. I drove through and took more pictures, just to document it. Richard sent me the official order from the judge, and I filed it carefully with all my other documentation. February and March passed without incident. I started to think that maybe, finally, Patricia had gotten the message. Then April arrived, and with it came a new problem. I received a notice from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA that they were planning to install speed bumps on Old Mill Road. The notice was carefully worded, stating that this was being done for safety reasons due to concerns about traffic speeds through the residential area. A community meeting was scheduled to discuss the proposal. I almost ignored it, but something made me decide to attend. The meeting was held in the community center, a nice building at the heart of the development. About 40 people were there, most of them homeowners from the development. Patricia stood at the front with a presentation on a screen showing various speed bump designs. I sat in the back and listened. Patricia talked about child safety, speeding vehicles, and the need to calm traffic through the neighborhood. It all sounded reasonable until you realized that the speed bumps she was proposing were massive things that would make passage by any commercial vehicle extremely difficult, if not impossible. When she opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. Patricia's expression soured when she saw me, but she could not ignore me in a public meeting. Yes, I am wondering how these speed bumps will affect commercial delivery vehicles that have legal easement rights to use this road. The speed bumps are designed to allow normal vehicle traffic while encouraging appropriate speeds. But commercial trucks, like firewood delivery trucks or propane tankers, cannot safely traverse speed bumps of the size you are showing. This seems like another attempt to restrict my easement rights. Several homeowners turned to look at me with interest. Patricia's face tightened. This is about safety, not about your deliveries. If safety is the concern, why not use smaller speed bumps or other traffic calming measures that don't effectively block commercial vehicle access? A man in the front row spoke up. Excuse me, Patricia, but I think he has a point. I work from home and get a lot of business deliveries. Those speed bumps would make it impossible for larger trucks to reach my house too. A woman a few rows over nodded. And what about moving trucks? People buy and sell houses. Are we going to make it impossible for moving companies to service the neighborhood? Patricia tried to regain control of the meeting. These are all good points that we will take into consideration during the design process. With all due respect, I said, standing up, this looks like the design process. You are presenting specific speed bump models. If you are really concerned about safety, why not install speed limit signs, add some of those radar speed displays, or increase police patrols? Those solutions address speeding without blocking legitimate commercial traffic. More homeowners started murmuring among themselves. I could see that I had struck a nerve. Not everyone in the development was on board with Patricia's crusade against me. Donald Pritchard, one of the other board members, leaned over to whisper something to Patricia. She shook her head firmly, but he kept talking. Finally, she held up her hands. We will table this discussion and revisit it at next month's meeting after we have explored additional options. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that, and several homeowners came up to talk to me as people filed out. They introduced themselves and expressed frustration with how Patricia had been running the HOA. One couple, Mark and Jennifer Chen, mentioned that they had been thinking about running for the board in the upcoming elections. She has been a nightmare, Jennifer said quietly. The dues keep going up, she makes decisions without consulting anyone, and now this thing with you. I looked into it after the court ruling made the news. You are completely in the right. I appreciate that, I said. I have nothing against the neighborhood or the people who live here. I just want to use the legal rights that came with my property. We get it, Mark added. And honestly, a lot of us are tired of Patricia's attitude. She acts like she owns the whole development. That conversation gave me hope. Maybe the solution was not just legal action, but political change within the HOA itself. The next month, I attended another meeting. Patricia had scaled back her speed bump proposal significantly, suggesting much smaller bumps that would not impede commercial traffic. It was a victory, though she framed it as if it had been her idea all along. But the real news at that meeting was the announcement of the upcoming board elections. 3 positions were open, including the president role. Mark and Jennifer announced they were running, along with 2 other homeowners who seemed reasonable. Patricia announced she would run for re-election as president. I could not vote since I was not part of the HOA, but I watched the campaign with interest. Tom kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip. Apparently, Patricia was going door to door, trying to shore up support, but her approval rating had taken a serious hit. The legal defeats, the contempt finding, and the personal fine had all damaged her reputation. Add to that the rising HOA fees and her generally imperious attitude, and she was in trouble. The election was held in early June. Mark and Jennifer both won seats on the board, and another reasonable candidate, a retired teacher named Helen Kowalski, won the 3rd seat. But the big news was the presidential race. Patricia lost by a landslide. Mark Chen became the new HOA president. The change was immediate and dramatic. At the first meeting under the new board, Mark made a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA for the harassment I had endured. He also announced that the HOA would be paying my attorney fees, which had run into the tens of thousands of dollars at that point. "We are here to serve the homeowners of this community, not to wage personal vendettas," Mark said. The previous board's actions were inappropriate, illegal, and not representative of our values. Patricia attended that meeting, sitting in the back with a sour expression. She left halfway through and, according to Tom, put her house on the market the following week. But that was not quite the end of the story. In July, I received a call from Richard with some surprising news. "William, you need to come to my office. There is something you should see." I drove into Burlington the next morning, curious and a bit concerned. Richard led me into his office and pulled out a thick folder. After we won the case, I filed some additional public records requests, just to make sure we had everything documented. I wanted to see if there was any other information about the easement or the development process that might be relevant. "Okay," I said slowly. "I found something interesting. When Meadowbrook Hills was first proposed, the developers had to go through the Planning Commission approval process. Part of that process involved reviewing all existing easements and making sure the development plan did not interfere with any legal rights of way." "Right, that makes sense. The Planning Commission files show that the developers were fully aware of your easement. In fact, there was a note in the file specifically flagging it and requiring that the development be designed to accommodate the commercial traffic rights associated with it." I felt a cold suspicion forming. So they knew from the beginning. They absolutely knew. And here is where it gets interesting. Patricia Hendricks was not just a homeowner in the development. She was the real estate agent who sold most of the houses in Phase 1 of the project. She worked directly with the developers. You are kidding. I have the transaction records. She sold over 30 houses in that development. There is no way she did not know about the easement. She would have had access to all the disclosure documents. I sat back in my chair, processing this. So she knew I had legal right to the easement. She knew the development was built with that in mind, and she still decided to come after me. It looks that way. And there is more. I pulled the HOA financial records, which are public. Over the past 3 years, Patricia approved several contracts for road work and maintenance with a company called Hendricks Property Services. Let me guess. Owned by her husband, Robert Hendricks. The HOA paid that company over $200,000 in the past 3 years for various services, some of which appear to be questionable or at least inflated in price. This was bigger than I had realized. That is fraud, is it not? Potentially. It is certainly a conflict of interest. HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the community, not to enrich themselves. If she was awarding contracts to her husband's company without proper disclosure or competitive bidding, that is a serious problem. What do we do with this information? I think we need to turn it over to the new HOA board. They can decide whether to pursue it further, but they might want to bring in law enforcement. I called Mark Chen and arranged a meeting. Richard and I met with him, Jennifer and Helen at the community center the following week. We laid out everything we had found. Their expressions grew darker as we went through the documents. I knew something was off about those maintenance contracts, Helen said. The costs always seemed high, but Patricia would get defensive if anyone questioned them. We need to bring this to the other homeowners, Mark said, and we should probably contact the police. I would also recommend getting a forensic accountant to review the HOA books, Richard suggested. If there is fraud here, you want to know the full extent of it. The next month was a whirlwind. The new HOA board hired a forensic accountant who found evidence of extensive financial irregularities. The Hendricks Company had been billing for services that were never performed, inflating costs, and receiving payment for materials that were never delivered. The total appeared to be somewhere north of $80,000. The board contacted the Vermont Attorney General's office, which opened an investigation. In September, Patricia and Robert Hendricks were both arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The story made the local news. I watched the coverage showing Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, and I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. All of this could have been avoided if she had just accepted that I had legal rights to my easement. The criminal case moved through the system slowly. The Hendricks hired an expensive lawyer and fought the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. In March of the following year, they both pleaded guilty as part of a plea agreement. Robert got 3 years in prison, and Patricia got 2 years plus restitution to the HOA. By that time, they had already sold their house and moved away. The HOA used the restitution money and the proceeds from a lawsuit against the Hendricks to repave Old Mill Road properly and make several other improvements to the community that had been neglected. My life returned to normal. I continued getting my firewood deliveries, my propane fills, and my occasional furniture drop-offs, all using the easement without any interference. The new HOA board even sent me a holiday card at the end of that year, thanking me for my patience and apologizing again for what had happened. Tom and I sat on my porch one evening the following spring, drinking beers and watching the sun set over the mountains. The trees were budding, and there was that fresh smell in the air that comes with a Vermont spring. Hard to believe it has been almost 2 years since this whole thing started, Tom said. I know, feels like a lifetime. You think Patricia ever figured out that she was wrong? I thought about that. I honestly do not know. Some people are so convinced they are right that they can never see another perspective. She probably still thinks she was justified. At least she is paying for it now. Yeah, I took a sip of my beer. You know what the crazy thing is? If she had just left me alone from the beginning, none of this would have come to light. She could have kept running her little scam for years. Pride goes before a fall, my friend. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn orange and purple. My woodpile was stacked neatly next to the shed, ready for next winter. The propane tank was full. Everything was as it should be. The whole experience had taught me something about standing up for your rights, even when it seems easier to just give in. It would have been simpler to pay those initial fines, to find another way to get my deliveries, to avoid the conflict. But that would have meant surrendering a legal right that had been attached to my property for decades. And once you start surrendering your rights to people who have no legal authority to demand them, where does it end? I also learned something about community. Despite the problems with Patricia, most of the people in Meadowbrook Hills were decent folks who just wanted to live their lives in peace. Once they understood what was really happening, many of them supported me. The HOA itself was not evil. It was just a tool, and like any tool, it depended on who was wielding it. Under Patricia's leadership, it became an instrument of harassment and personal enrichment. Under Mark and the new board, it became what it was supposed to be, an organization serving the legitimate interests of the community. The legal system worked too, eventually. It was slow and expensive, but Judge Whitmore saw through the HOA's bad faith arguments and ruled correctly based on the law. The Attorney General's office investigated the fraud seriously and brought charges. The system is not perfect, but when I needed it, it functioned. As summer arrived, I noticed something interesting. The new HOA board had organized a community picnic and invited all the surrounding property owners, including me. I was not sure about going at first, given everything that had happened, but Tom convinced me to give it a shot. "They are different people now," he said. "Give them a chance." So I went. Mark greeted me warmly at the entrance, and I found myself actually enjoying the afternoon. I met homeowners I had never spoken to before, tried some excellent grilled food, and even played a bit of volleyball. Several people came up to apologize for Patricia's behavior and express gratitude that I had stood my ground. "If you had not fought back, we might never have learned what she was doing with the HOA money," one woman told me. "You did us all a favor." By the time I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of closure. The nightmare was over, the bad actors had been punished, and life had returned to normal. Better than normal, actually, because I had a new appreciation for my rights, my community, and the importance of standing up for what is legally and morally correct. That fall, Jason delivered my firewood as usual. The truck rumbled up Old Mill Road without incident, and we unloaded the wood into neat stacks by my shed. As he was getting ready to leave, I noticed someone watching from across the way. It was Mark, out for a walk with his dog. He waved and I waved back. "Good haul this year," Jason said, looking at the stacks. "Should get me through the winter nicely." "Same time next year." "Same time next year," I confirmed. As his truck pulled away down the Easement road, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was exactly what the easement was for. Exactly what the farmers and property owners of 1947 had established, and exactly what I had every legal right to use. No HOA president with an inflated sense of authority could change that, no matter how hard they tried. The mountains were brilliant with fall colors, and the air had that crisp quality that made me glad to live in Vermont. I had 10 cords of firewood, a secure propane supply, good neighbors both old and new, and the legal certainty that my property rights were protected. The law had worked, justice had been served, and life was good. I walked back to my house, already planning the first fire of the season. Behind me, Old Mill Road stretched into the distance, just as it had for nearly 80 years, a testament to the enduring nature of properly recorded easements and the rights they protect. Patricia Hendricks had learned that lesson the hard way, but it was a lesson nonetheless. Some things, like legal rights and property law, are bigger than any individual's sense of entitlement, and no amount of HOA bluster can change that fundamental truth.